Well, it is 10 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. We still got folks trickling in, which is great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I think everyone that's currently here has been here before, of course, but if not, welcome to any newcomers. And we're so glad to have you for our discussion. It is going to be a fun discussion today. We are going to be talking about very interesting type of genre that kind of comes in and out, but mostly in, and has been in for over 200 years, which is Gothic literature. So this is going to be really, really exciting. And we've got Maggie Thomas is going to be talking to us today, kind of giving us a survey. Maureen and I were just talking about books that we are rediscovering and getting a chance to learn about. So I think after today's session, you will get a chance to, I think you'll have like an even bigger reading list. So that'll be really, really fun. I'm going to start off just with saying that I actually never considered myself to be a Gothic literature person or a Gothic bibliophile, and that's mainly because I'm actually really easily frightened. And so I try to minimize that. However, I think you'll see today, between talking to Maggie and she and I have had some side conversations about it. Gothic literature is more than just about this, the horror or even maybe the stereotypical blood and guts. It's not just that. Maybe that might be a part of it, but it's a lot more than that. So we're going to get a chance to get into what is it actually, and do I actually like Gothic literature? Even if you think you don't, maybe you do. You'll get a chance to see. But first off, let's start off with our usual Where's Andrew segment. Looks like Andrew is in a really cool place today. I love that flooring and I love the symmetrical positioning of these cases. Andrew, do you want to give us any hints?
It is in England. And it is definitely rather old.
Okay.
Very, very old. I want to emphasize that.
Ooh.
It's not the Bodleian, is it?
No.
Not the
Is it associated with either Oxford or Cambridge?
Cambridge.
Cambridge. Is it at King's College?
No.
Oh, okay. Is this, I don't know if this will be giving it away. So is this like accessible to the public?
I believe so. The big connection is actually, see if I can get my finger right. My finger's disappearing on me. The statue in the back.
The statue in the back.
See if I can get it again. That's even worse. I am actually trying to point at it. But
okay, I got to think about also, we got to think connection to Gothic novels or Gothic literature. Does it have, okay, it's really old. Does it have anything to, is it like, can you give us a little bit more about the connection to Gothic literature? Is there anything you can tell us?
The statue is of Lord Byron.
Oh, cool. I was going to say, is the statue a vampire? But
no.
Lord Byron instead. That's kind of different.
Too bad Bob's not here. I'm sure he would nail it.
He would know by now. He probably will be here. He just said he might have to be a little late, so he would know by now.
Okay, Laura, you're our secret hope. You're just holding back, I can tell.
I think I just Googled it. Trinity College Library in Cambridge.
Yes, the Vanna Library.
I Googled it. Woohoo!
Yay, research
It
skills.
still counts.
Andrew, it's funny that there's a statue of Lord Byron. I feel like there's a statue or some kind of monument to him also in Greece too, I think. So maybe he's got a couple different statues around. That's so interesting. Okay, well, cool.
Well, this statue is like-sized. It was going to be put at Westminster Abbey, but it was felt that Byron was too immoral for that, so they put it here.
Yeah. For those of you who we're not going to have a chance to get, Lord Byron will be in some of our discussions today. We're not going to have a chance to get into the scandalous life he led. But for those of you who think you know what scandal means, you don't, because you have to look into Lord Byron's life. He was quite a rogue. That's so interesting. Well, as usual, and thank you, Lori, for that link. Appreciate it. So we can learn more about that. And then as usual, Andrew has the handout in the chat. So perfect. Thank you so much. That was a really good one because Lord Byron actually plays a big role too in one book that we're going to talk about that we have in the Bentley. So for those of you who have joined us in the middle of Andrew's segment, again, we are talking about Gothic novels and Gothic literature today. And I wanted to just give y'all, I saw something really interesting on, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the site Book Riot, but there's a lot of good blog posts and just general bookish information on this site. And I found something really cool, a really interesting description of Gothic fiction kind of through the ages. And I really liked this quote, so I'm going to read it. It says, Gothic fiction has its beginnings in Britain during the latter half of the 18th century. The earlier half had been dominated by essays, treatises, dramas, satires, and realistic fiction that was informed by Enlightenment ideals of reason and progress. Writers and readers of Gothic fiction reveled in what was more mysterious and less pragmatic, the supernatural, the strange, and surging feelings of all kinds. Though Gothic fiction has waxed and waned in popularity over 250 years, there are jewels from nearly every decade since the first. And I think that's an interesting, pretty good description. So when we talk about Gothic fiction, especially with regarding to the English language, because I know that other countries, I think I'm not as familiar, but I do believe that other nations have kind of their own traditions of Gothic fiction. But specifically talking about the English language, we're dealing with here the late 18th century, so the late 1700s, getting into the early 19th century. So Gothic fiction was, and I think in a way, emerged from and at the same time as really Romanticism. And then there were subgenres that came out of that Maggie is going to talk about later into the 19th century. So Maggie, would you like to get us started? And Maggie is going to have a combination of giving us some good info, but also kind of talking about her personal journey because she had almost like a revelation with regards to Gothic literature. So Maggie, if you don't mind, will you go ahead and take it away?
Sure. So yeah, let me preface my presentation with I had no idea that I liked Gothic literature. I didn't know what Gothic literature was. It was a very kind of mysterious title for a genre. Kind of like when I started working here, I learned all about dystopian novels. And I'm like, wow, I think I'm really into that. But then I found out about Gothic novels and I was like, no, I'm really into that. So the title that Joellen gave it is like, so you think you like Gothic novels? Is really funny because you probably don't know Gothic novels. And I didn't know them. But anyway, I was super excited to put this presentation together. Let me see.
And yeah, you should have access to share. Perfect.
Can you see it?
Yep.
Can you still?
Slide.
Is it still right?
It's not in presentation view.
Okay. I have multiple screens and I hate it when I'm trying to share stuff. So hold on. I had it all right. this morning I checked to make sure.
And just so y'all know, as Maggie is presenting, it might be kind of fun if we add into the chat if anyone has an affinity toward Gothic literature, or if you're curious, you've got questions about Gothic lit, and you're like, what are we talking about today? I still don't have a good idea. Or if you have a novel that is, you think might fit into that category, feel free to start putting those things in the chat so we can have a discussion. We see Lord Byron now.
That was the wrong window. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Can you see it?
Yep, that's great.
Oh my gosh. Ugh. Okay, so this first slide is a picture I took of some, but not all, of the Gothic literature I have in my collection. We're moving soon, and so quite a few things are packed already. But these were the books that were in my office. And I haven't read all of them. I've read most of them. I've seen some of the movies in preparation for reading the books. And I put a little black heart over here because it's all Gothic. I love Gothic culture and stuff. So when I was in high school, I was really into anything alternative, like horror, Gothic kind of stuff. And so I had no idea what Gothic was, of course, except for if you look at the pictures down at the bottom, you had people like the character Abby from NCIS. If any of you guys watch that, that's your typical goth, black hair. Here it says dark dramatic makeup, dyed black hair, mostly black clothing. This is a very stereotypical definition. But you have Lydia Dietz from Beetlejuice, and then you have Morticia Adams. And I had no idea what an actual Gothic person was. But I found out that shortly after, that it was a member of the Germanic people that overran the Roman Empire in the early centuries of the Christian era. So as you can see, they're not wearing any black clothing. They don't have black hair. I'm not sure how it went from this to this, but it sure did. Let's see. So in the 90s, when I was in high school, this is kind of what everybody who was in the Gothic culture wore, myself included to an extent. Black clothing. I had black boots. I didn't have a black cloak, but we all wore the Gothic jewelry and had the cool pocketbooks and stuff. And looking back at this, I really I can see how it was such an easy transition 20 years later for me to look at all these old, wonderful, beautiful books. And it's just, I don't know, it's really transitioned from a goth, mysterious kind of culture to the library rare book culture, and so it makes a lot of sense to me now in hindsight, looking back at it. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what are the elements of Gothic fiction? Like, what makes Gothic fiction Gothic fiction? Because like I said, I didn't know what Gothic fiction was. I knew what horror was. I knew what mysteries were. But Gothic was just kind of, I didn't understand the definition. So Gothic literature is relating to a style of writing that describes strange or frightening events that take place in mysterious places. So it's kind of like horror. It's more like psychological horror. It's not blood and guts kind of gore. And there are mysterious settings. It's not always necessarily in a building, a castle, but mysterious places. And as you can see, there's a graveyard in this picture. That's the first thing you think of when this person who posted this picture thought of Gothic literature. And you can see the arched windows here. Just like over here, you have your arches and your arched windows. It's the first thing you think about. So another definition for Gothic architecture is relating to a style of architecture that was popular in Europe between the 12th. Hold on. I can't see the chat. So if anybody puts anything fun in there, just pop in and interrupt me because I can't read it. I just saw something pop up, that's all. So of or relating to a style of architecture that was popular in Europe between the 12th and 16th centuries and uses pointed arches, tall and thin walls, and large windows. So you see over here, you have your, aren't these called flying buttresses? Maybe not, I don't know. And those, the little bridges and the circular windows, like the rose window of cathedrals, and the arched windows, the arched walkways, tall, thin walls with a spire on top.
See, I've always been fond of that kind of architecture, but again, I think
Yeah,
early on wouldn't have thought that would have related to like scary books that I would have considered scary.
yeah, exactly. It's like Gothic literature, to really understand what Gothic literature is, you have to understand why this Gothic architecture is so intertwined with your Gothic literature and your Gothic stories and stuff. Because you wouldn't just look at it and think, oh, look at the pretty blue sky behind it and the pretty building. But you really learn how to put these things together. And okay, so your elements of Gothic fiction. First, I have down here your main characters of a Gothic fiction. Not always, you don't have all of these things in a Gothic fiction, but you might have some, you might have others that aren't listed here. But first of all, the setting, an ancestral castle, an ancestral building that includes an ancestral curse sometimes. Hidden passages in the dungeon or the basement or behind walls. A lot of times there's clergy involved of some point, of some kind. Sometimes you have bandits, ruffians. You have your tyrant male, like the main male older guy hero, or not hero, older guy villain. And then you have your young, your youthful, your hero, your knight in shining armor kind of guy, sort of. And then you have your younger girl, who is usually part of the main part of the story, who is in love with the hero or vice versa. And then you have your older foolish woman. And sometimes this takes the form of the tyrant's wife. Sometimes this takes place of like the maid or the, you know what I mean, the person who helps the virginal maiden get dressed. I can't think of what that's called. And so getting to the setting, these are all words that you think of immediately when you think of a Gothic setting. You think mysterious, you think decaying, old, gloomy, but at the same time, it's magnificent and it's dramatic. It's maybe haunted. There's some secret, some dark secret about it. Could be cursed. It's very isolated. So basically, the close association between these settings in the Gothic stories and the architecture and the storylines, it often serves as a mirror for the characters in the story. So if your story is kind of haunted and mysterious, they have it set in a building that's kind of haunted and mysterious. It's just a mirror of what's going on with the people. It provides not only a gloomy backdrop for the story, but it is its own character sometimes. A lot of times the castle or the building or wherever it's happening becomes almost alive, becomes almost its own person, but not literally, maybe figuratively. It's like, oh God, the house is so haunted. It feels like it's alive. And that's really cool.
And it's one of those things where it's like, I love that idea of kind of the house becoming like taking on like the personification kind of the house or the space. And then also it's like an uncontrollable kind of
Yeah,
person.
a big part of Gothic literature is the unknown.
Yeah.
So you don't know if the house is going to eat you alive. You don't know if it's haunted. You don't know if it's like the house that's haunted rather than ghosts being in the house. That kind of thing. The unknown, psychological terror, psychological horror. The ruins of Gothic buildings would represent inevitable decay and the inhabitants' moral decay. So again, it mirrors. Um, a lot of times, Gothic mansions are really enormous. They're way too big for the current residents who live there. There are certain wings that are closed. Maybe they only live in the west wing or they only live in the east wing, and there are locked doors in the other part of the house. So it's mysterious. Um, and you feel isolated. It's so large and isolated, maybe out in the country. The protagonist can't easily turn to their neighbors for help. Um, so you get a sense of dissociation from the rest of the world. You really get drawn in just to what's happening in that story with those people. Um, and then I don't really talk about the fall of the House of Usher, but I thought this was a perfect quote. I don't know how it was, but first glimpse of the building, a sense of insufferable gloom pervaded my spirit. And you see that happening a lot. People, characters in books. The first time I saw the house, I was like, it's beautiful, but at the same time, it's horrible. Um, One of my favorite descriptions of in The Haunting of Hill House, written by Shirley Jackson, when one of the characters first pulls up into the driveway of the house, and she looks at it and she goes, "Oh, it's vile." I just thought that was a great word, vile. She thought the house was just something horrible about it.
Hey, Maggie. So
Yeah.
you mentioned that people are usually in a house. They are kind of dissociated from the rest of the world. They're stuck with the same people, and there's a sense of insufferable gloom. Are we living a Gothic novel?
Did not even think about that. This
Were we
pandemic
living
we
a
just
Gothic
lived
novel in
through, the Gothic 19 instead of COVID 19.
Yeah.
That's great. Oh my God, Joelle, and I didn't even put that together. So maybe that's why I found out during this year that I like Gothic novels so much, because it mirrored what I was going through in my real life.
Yeah,
That's an interesting
probably.
point. That's a really interesting point. So just bring up real quick the first Gothic novel, regarded as the first Gothic novel, The Castle of Otranto. And I've read this actually while I was in quarantine back in August of last year when I had COVID. That it was a little hard to read at first because of language, and it's a lot of, I don't want to say flowery words, but a lot of words that we don't use in current language. And it was just, I was trying to explain it to my husband, and it's like it takes an entire paragraph to say what we would say now in like 2 sentences. So it was a really great book. It was pretty short. I think it would be considered a novella, because it's almost like a short story, but not quite. But Walpole's aim at the time when he wrote it was to combine the elements of the medieval romance, which he deemed too fanciful, and the modern novel of the time, which he considered too strict. So he wanted something that was like a mixture of the two. And fun fact about it, he originally published the first edition of The Castle of Otranto as a medieval romance from Italy that was discovered and republished like several hundred years later, by a fictitious translator. And then when the second edition, and it was received wonderfully, everybody loved it. But then when the second edition came out, he admitted to his authorship, and then all of a sudden everybody was like, "Oh, no, that's not any good anymore." They rejected it. So the reviewers' rejection reflected a larger cultural bias. So the romance, the medieval romance, or the current romance books, were usually held in contempt by the educated. They were tawdry and debased. But a romance that Walpole wrote with kind of a superstitious element was considered a setback. And so we were going back and not moving forward in the Age of Enlightenment where we were supposed to be at the time. So Walpole's forgery, together with the blend of history and fiction, conflicted with the principles of the Enlightenment of the time and associated the Gothic novel with fake documentation. So that's just a cool little fact about the Castle of Otranto. And you can see here 3 different modern covers of, actually this is the one I own, but they're the modern covers of some Castle of Otranto books. And I ended up loving this book, reading it during quarantine, loving it way more than I thought I was going to. And then it kind of, I guess it did get me started. It's appropriate that the first Gothic book got me started on Gothics.
So Maggie, can we go back for just a second? So with the Castle of Otranto, so you said, and we've got I'm going to show, we've got a first edition copy here in the rare book room from this one, 1765. This one is, I believe. So early edition. So, and it has in here this translator's preface, but it wasn't translated, right?
Right.
So it says it was originally in Italian, but then it never was in Italian.
No, all that's fake news.
It was just because it would make people.
Yeah, because
like,
Walpole, I think what happened is Walpole really wanted, it seems to me like he wanted the general public to think that it wasn't all just medieval romance in the back that was in the past that was tawdry and debased. It was like they had these fantastic things going on in the past, and look what I found. But it ended up that he made it all up, and everybody felt, I think everybody would have, they loved the book, obviously, but they all felt kind of lied to and taken advantage of, and automatically they hated it. So the Castle of Otranto went through several phases where it was popular and great, everybody hated it, and then it came back around into popularity again. So I could go on forever, and the list could be so long of Gothic novels through the ages. And this could be a couple-hour presentation if you wanted it to be. It's already 10:30. Oh my God. Okay, so these are just a few of the ones I picked out that I thought, to me, were the most important. And The Vampire is another short story. It's a novella, I think. I read that in one sitting when we had an open house downstairs, like in person. I read that while Joellen was giving the open house.
I remember that Maggie was just sitting in a corner. I was reading, and then she goes, "I just finished this novel, and this is what it's about."
I got so into it, and it was so easy to read. Okay, so the next one of my favorites is a short story by Edgar Allan Poe, The Mask of the Red Death. Short synopsis, real quick. It's basically a rich guy's attempt to avoid the plague at the time that was called the Red Death by hiding in his castle, his abbey. He invited all the rich folks, society folks around him to come and sequester themselves and basically quarantine themselves all in his abbey to avoid getting the plague. And then the 7 rooms of the abbey represent your stages of life. So you see how the abbey is like a character of itself. Each room starts from birth all the way to death, and just not being able to avoid the plague and everything. It's a fun little short story. You can read it real quick.
When did you read this?
When?
Yeah.
I don't know. Sometime within the past year. Full disclosure, I found it
too soon. I can't read it while we're in quarantine.
It's really short. It's not that bad. It's not. No, you can read it. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Never would have thought that was a Gothic novel, but it does have Gothic elements. I like this quote. The characters are representative of distorted humanity of the capitalist society. And it is foreshadowing death, the whole book. It's the fear of the unknown. Is he going to die at the end? What happened? The ghosts that come to visit him. Very Gothic, if you just think about it. And then The House of Seven Gables. I actually have not read that one yet. I have it on my list, and you see I have the book here in my office. It's full of bad omens, doom, murder, uh, lying, fictitious. I mean, it's just, classic Gothic. And then I also have not read The Mystery of Edwin Drood, but we just talked about that. Was that last week we talked about that?
Yeah,
Or a
yeah,
couple
something like
weeks
that
ago?
recently. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so again, you have another Charles Dickens book. A lot of books that Charles Dickens wrote were Gothic themed, Gothic style. So the next list of books I have, a Gothic revival. Now these are the Gothic books. Gothic, let's see, these books were all in the early 1800s, except for The Mystery of Edwin Drood, which is past 1850s to 1870. But then about 20 or so years later, you had a Gothic revival, and all of a sudden you had these books come out. This is when the same period as Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and
I think Frankenstein was early.
oh,
I think it was a
sorry.
little earlier. But my question though, that's really interesting. I've heard Gothic revival before. What like do you know what prompted that?
Um,
I don't know.
it was okay. So it was questioning the social structures of the time of the late 1800s. So it there were contemporary fears like ethical degeneration. So if you look at Dorian Gray, or if you look at Dr. Jekyll, or Mr. Hyde, I mean, especially, or, Dracula, they're ethically questionable people. They are sinister people. And it was mirroring the social um, contemporary fears at the time. That's really
Uh-huh.
all I know.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, and
So
you're right though, because I know that like especially with like Oscar Wilde, he was very critical of like Victorian society. And I know that like Dorian Gray looked like, I mean, he was good looking and but he was just so depraved morally. And maybe
right.
I think, yeah, talking about like, oh, people aren't as good as they purport to be and things like that.
Yeah. Um, so Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is actually a very short book, and I didn't realize it, and I loved it. I read it in one sitting. It was great. It was a lot different than I expected it to be. A lot of the contemporary movies that have redone a lot of Gothic stories, and in our time, in like the 20th century, late 20th century, early 21st century, have been um, trying to get mainstream interested in it. There's a lot of horror and a lot of scary jump scares and horrible things that happen that are simply for the scare, and they're not necessarily a major part of the original book. A lot of times earlier movies from the turn of this not turn the mid-century, around the 50s and 60s, mostly 50s and 60s, those movies they're more true to the original books. So if you get a chance to watch a movie, Dracula, a movie that was written in shown in 1950 or 60, it's going to be so much different than a Dracula movie that you watch that was published in 2010 or something like that. And then The Turn of the Screw, I just wanted to hit on that real quickly. The Turn of the Screw, it was one of my favorites as well. It was another one that was a little hard for me to read because of the language. I had a lot of words said in a full paragraph to say what it said in like 2 sentences, but I really liked it. I really did. And I'll get into that again in just a minute. One book I definitely want to hit on with Gothic satire, Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey. This is the excesses, stereotypes, and frequent absurdities of traditional Gothic made it rich territory for satire. The naive protagonist of Northanger Abbey, Catherine, she reads too much Gothic fiction, and she sees herself as a heroine, much like Radcliffean romance. Anne Radcliffe, which I didn't include in here. She's a big Gothic stylized author. So Catherine imagines murder and villainy and everything happening everywhere around her. It's a parody of Anne Radcliffe's The Mysteries of Udolpho. So this is not the only book that's Gothic satire, but this is like the one you think of when you think of Gothic satire. And then you have Southern Gothic and other subgenres. And I'm going to hit on Southern Gothic. I'm not really going to get into other subgenres. There are tons of them. But Southern Gothic is a literary style that takes Gothic themes and places them in a magical, realist, American South setting. So we've moved across the pond, and the Southern Gothic takes the same kind of mysterious air, gloomy and stuff like that of Gothic novels, and gives it like spirituality and voodoo kind of things that happen in the South. You think the steamy, hot Southern Louisiana plantations and stuff like that, with your racial tension, with your slavery, deeply flawed characters, a lot of social anxieties, and then you mix in your mystery and your supernatural. And these are examples of classic Southern Gothics that not necessarily have supernatural always, but it's the you get the idea. They're very flawed, disturbing, eccentric characters.
So can I just add, and I think this is kind of where we're getting into our fun name here. So you think you like Gothic literature. I know that when I read, or people that have read Beloved, like I read Beloved, I know, and then Their Eyes Are Watching God, To Kill a Mockingbird. Those are all novels that I have read, and I would have never considered those to be considered like Gothic or Southern Gothic, but I don't think I realized that's what was that those Gothic elements that existed in them, especially Beloved. Now that you say it, I'm like, yes.
Yeah. That's exactly it. So you think you like Gothic literature? No, you don't know Gothic literature. And I didn't know Gothic literature, and it makes me so happy to teach you guys. If you didn't know about it, I want to spread this across the world. And then contemporary Gothic. This is mid-century and later, except for Rebecca, 1938. But The Lottery is a very, very short story. You can read that in I don't know, I read it in about 5 or 10 minutes. My favorite is Rosemary's Baby, and I'll get into that. In The Lottery, for example, there is a sense of impending doom the whole time you read it. You don't know what's going to happen. You know something's going to happen. You just don't know what's going to happen. And it's not necessarily set in a place, a setting, like a castle or anything, but it's got the same elements. So you have to kind of not really thinking outside the box, but you have to be open to interpretation a lot of times when you're reading things that are labeled as Gothic. Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice would be considered Southern Gothic. Her whole Vampire Chronicles would be considered Southern Gothic, honestly. And again, you have maybe not the castles, but a lot of the plantations from the past, especially in the Interview with the Vampire and things like that. So Rosemary's Baby is set in a New York City apartment building called the Bramford. And you'll see how the Bramford has like a life of its own, a personality of its own. Things have happened there in the past, and people have bad associations with it and things like that. And it's not a scary book. It's psychologically, it's really interesting. Also, The Shining. I never would have thought Stephen King wrote Gothic, but I've been reading Stephen King for decades, and I'm like, hey, The Shining is perfectly Gothic. You have the Overlook Hotel, and the hotel comes to life, and you have the tyrant, crazy guy, the Jack, the father, and then you have the young heroine, kind of. She does the wife. I can't remember her name, and so Stephen King has written hundreds of short stories, and he's written technically 62 novels. And according to the site that I was looking at, only 2 of his novels were listed as Gothic, but I don't think so. Like I was saying, it's up to interpretation.
Maggie, Tamara put in a really interesting comment. She said, so how are Gothic and suspense different? Thinking of Hitchcock's suspense film, so atmospheric with a sense of impending doom. That's a really good question to throw out to the group.
Well, actually, okay, so The Haunting of Hill House, no, not The Haunting of Hill House. Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. That was actually a 1963 movie, I think, or 1959, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. And so Alfred Hitchcock is he's a very Gothic kind of director. He's a very Gothic storyteller, and he hides the fact that it's Gothic. And he doesn't hide it, but you don't see the fact that his stories are Gothic. The same was like with Psycho. They'd have that big, huge house back in the background with the guy who lives there with his mother, and they run the hotel in the front. It's a very Gothic castle kind of house in the background. Alfred Hitchcock suspense, I'll get into that real quick. In the 20th century, you had pulp magazines such as Weird Tales, and this is where the Gothic genre gave way to modern horror fiction. So it's a branch of Gothic. So I guess we're talking about another subgenre. So Alfred Hitchcock and his suspense, that kind of suspense, would be considered like a subgenre. It's like the American horror. And then real quick, last slide I have, if that answers, I mean, that's, so you think you like Gothic, you like Alfred Hitchcock, you like Gothic. So just recently, The Haunting of Hill House and The Turn of the Screw, which is The Haunting of Bly Manor is based on, were released as original series on Netflix, and they are so good. They're retellings. I mean, they're loosely based on, but if you read Turn of the Screw and then you watch The Haunting of Bly Manor, I highly recommend it. They did a really good job. And it's The Haunting of Hill House is fantastic. If anybody saw the movie The Haunting from 1999, was that The Haunting of Hill House? Okay, I get The Haunting of Hill House mixed up all the time with The House on Haunted Hill, so I'm just going to stop right there. But anyway, if you get a chance to check out either of these Netflix series, it's really worth binge watching. It really is. So, oh yeah, and then The Vampire I show on the right is The Vampire was accounted as one of the most influential works of fiction ever written and spawned a craze for vampire fiction, which has not ceased to this day.
Absolutely. And I think we can all attest to that. Another thing, actually, my mom brought up that 2 books that I enjoyed as a little girl and 2 little movies, The Secret Garden and Beauty and the Beast. I never considered those have, I don't know if they'd be considered Gothic, but they have elements of, you know.
I mean, once you know what the elements of Gothic fiction are, you find it everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of fairy tales, because the castles are involved, and you have the witch, and then you have the part of the castle, the part of the house that's cut off, like they only live in one wing, and the other part of the wing is like where the dead mother used to live, and they don't go over there. Anyway, it's fantastic. Almost, I don't know, I could go on forever. I could list every single movie or book that has to do with Gothic anything. It's just too much fun.
Yay! Well, thank you so much, Maggie. And so, as I told you, I warned you, you're going to have a big reading list after.
The list is huge.
There's so many different things. And then just addressing Tamara's comment, if, Gothic literature by women writers is somewhat different. Absolutely. I think, I definitely think that's the case. And that's probably, that sounds like a good research project for someone. Really, really interesting. Yeah, so again, if you think you like Gothic literature, you think you didn't, you have an idea now of how expansive it can be. And I just have I just have a couple pictures that I wanted to show you guys before we play our game.
I'm sorry if I ran long.
No, this is fine. Totally fine. That was perfect and gave us all a chance to have some great discussion. So thank you. And it's a lot to talk about. I wanted to just show a couple things from the Bentley that Maggie mentioned and a couple additional things too. This is what Maggie was talking about with the Castle of Otranto. This is from the 1765. This is the translator's preface. And we see here, translated by William Marshall from the original Italian, which was totally just not true. But it added an element, I think, of mystery. And, I think too, just stereotypically for, folks that were British, I think that if something was coming, I think they kind of thought there was some element of mystery and to Italy. And,
and the mystery was like, where did this come from?
Where did
Why
it come
haven't we
from? It
seen
just
this
appeared.
before,
Yeah, so that would have been a selling point, marketing. And again, and also, Maggie, can I just say, you had like your people that generally are involved in the Gothic novels, and I think one of them you said was a virginal maiden, and we see here our most beautiful virgin, aged 18, called Matilda.
Yeah.
So
they spelled it out for you right there, didn't they?
Spelled it out. They're like, okay, here's your token characters. Oh, look, a homely youth, sickly, and of no promising disposition. So we've got our sickly person. So I love that. This is also, Maggie mentioned the vampire. So cool story. I know we discussed that it's was, written by John Polidori, but really, again, this, I don't know, quarantine keeps coming up, but kind of John Polidori, Lord Byron, and Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, and Percy Shelley. Yeah, and I think somebody else. I think actually Mary Shelley's sister, who had an interesting relationship with her husband. But anyway, they were all quarantined, basically. They were in Geneva, Switzerland. I think the weather was bad, and they decided to come up. They were telling ghost stories. And then Percy Shelley got like overwhelmed with fright. So he like ran out of the room. And then they decided they wanted to come up with a contest to see who could tell the best like scary story. And out of that contest came Frankenstein, and then also came the vampire. So I think that Lord Byron might have started that tale, and then John Polidori actually kind of fleshed it out into a book, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what I've heard too.
Yeah, so kind of cool how that just kind of came up. They were all just having fun, and we got two critical works out of it. Yes, absolutely, Tamika. Quarantine is the new Gothic literature of our lives. It absolutely is. So we see that. That's kind of weird. That theme is like part of it. That's interesting, being sequestered. So anyway, I was just reading this, and y'all, I told you I'm easily scared. So I was reading this and getting scared. I didn't like it. So I'm not gonna.
Oh, it's not scary. It's wonderful.
I don't like talking.
Scary today is so different than scary from the past.
This is scary. It's saying that the dead rising from their graves and feeding upon the blood of the young and beautiful, human blood suckers. That scares me. So anyway, I told you I'm just easily frightened. Another one I wanted to just bring up, we've got some books in our collection by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, who again, and this idea of, it is called A Stable for Nightmares, originally published in, I think, 1896, or Weird Tales. It's kind of funny. That was like a thing then, Weird Tales. I saw that on one of your slides.
Yeah, the pulp magazines from the mid-century and later America. Yeah.
Yeah, called Weird Tales. But anyway, so Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu was an Irish writer of Gothic fiction and horror. And I wanted to show, this is so anyway, we see here this looks very, I think, kind of Gothic. And then, that looks scary. That's in there. That was like one of the only illustrations. That's really scary. but this is a more modern print, Sheridan Le Fanu, The Diabolical Genius. But I just wanted to point out Carmilla, which is a vampire story. And this one is really unique because it involves a woman vampire who is, I don't know, seeking or, hunting, I guess, another woman. So there's kind of what Tamara was talking about, that undercurrent of sexual tension that is occurring here. That Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, he wrote about that, but in like more of a lesbian type of relationship, which was I think this is one of the first vampire novels to do that. So I have not read it.
Speaking of, I'm sorry to interrupt. Interview with the Vampire is very sexual and romantic throughout this book, and it's not like explicitly sexual, but talking about a lesbian romance. I think there was much more of a romance between the two main vampires in Interview with the Vampire, and they cut all that out in the movie, and so people are missing out so much that haven't read the book.
Interesting, yeah. And this, again, I haven't read this one, but I know, like you said, it's kind of subtle.
Yeah.
But then we see movies and books like Twilight that I think it's not as subtle. We see the direct connection between like a vampire, like hunting, and then also like that sexual tension that turned, I guess, into love. But yeah, it's kind of, that one is more direct, but some of these are a little bit more subtle.
Subtle is a really good word. I should have used that.
Oh no, but yeah, I think that's a really interesting, really interesting. So anyway, and then also I just love the back cover of this book because again, this is a more of a modern reprint, but it's part of this series. This publisher, let's see if I can. Yeah, this publisher did the Forgotten Classics of Mystery series. So we've got like The Best of Wilkie Collins, and they didn't say the Forgotten Classics of Gothic. They said Forgotten Classic of Mystery, but you see other people, of course, Edgar Allan Poe, who we're used to, and
I think that's because people automatically know what mystery means.
Yeah,
but people don't know what Gothic means.
But it's like, look at Maggie, it's like so many things you mentioned. So Robert Louis Stevenson, I see Anne Radcliffe around here somewhere, Udolpho, of course, and we had, I think Dickens is somewhere up top. But anyway, it's just a lot of things that you kind of were mentioning too, I think. Oh yeah. Hunted Down, I don't know that one. And anyway, just a lot of different things that I guess they considered were forgotten mysteries, and they're like, you can buy these we've serialized, or we've made anthologies, and you can buy them. So anyway, I think that's pretty cool. But so anyway, I wanted to just show a couple things from the Bentley collection, and yes, we've got a wonderful collection of Gothic lit in the Bentley, and some really, really cool first editions and early editions. Last thing before we go, we're just going to take a little quiz as a group. This is not a what do you know quiz. This is like, we're going to put all our answers together and see what we come up with. It's going to be really fun. So I found this quiz on, actually, of all places, sparknotes.com. They've changed since I didn't know that they had quizzes on here that were fun. But Maggie and I found this, and we thought, so this quiz is called Which Gothic Novel Are You? So since there's a bunch of us, we're going to have to like just combine answers and see who we are. So Maggie and I already took this separately, and we can't tell them what book we got yet.
Okay.
We'll tell them at the end which book we got.
Okay.
Because Maggie and I did not get the same book. Okay. Let's pick a setting. Whoever calls out first, we're just going to go with that.
A Misty Forest.
Okay. Misty Forest, here we go. Okay. Which subject is your favorite or was your favorite in school? Or
History.
History. Okay, got history. You believe in ghosts?
Yes.
Yes. Pick a scary movie. I only knew one of like two of them, so.
Night of the Living Dead.
Okay, I don't even know that movie.
Oh,
Gary? Okay, which of these seems most romantic to you? I know mine, but I'll wait for everybody to whoever wants to call out first.
Enemies becoming lovers.
That was the one I picked. I love that. That
Oh.
was the one I picked too.
I picked growing old together. How
You did?
romantic.
Oh no, I don't know. I love the tension of people being like hating each other and then falling in love. I just love that. All right, pick a genre.
Science fiction.
Okay. Sci-fi. All right, pick a word.
The unknowable.
Okay, cool. All right. Oh my gosh, we got Rebecca.
Yay!
Rebecca is a Gothic romance, read psychological thriller. As we all know, about the second wife of a rich man whose century-old estate may or not be haunted by the ghost of his first wife. Like this Daphne du Maurier novel, you are bleak, ambiguous, and at times unpredictable. That definitely describes our group. And Tamara told us about Rebecca last week. We got a chance to, on our stop on the railway, we got to see Rebecca. So that is awesome. So when Maggie and I took this separately, I actually got Jane Eyre, which I love that book. And I never considered it really Gothic before. I'm like, that's a romantic book, but no, so I got that one. And Maggie, you want to tell the group what you got?
Oh, I got Frankenstein, which I thought was very apropos for me. Just, straight out there. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but the thing about Jane Eyre, we talked about that, and you guys can chime in too, I guess. Charlotte Bronte is a very Gothic style writer. So you might not have thought of Jane Eyre specifically as a Gothic book, but I bet if you read it now, as opposed to reading it 20 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever, you'll see it now. Like I said, once you know what the elements of Gothic are, you see it everywhere.
No, you're so right. I think I need to do another book I need to reread. My list of books to read and reread is just getting excessive. And absolutely. And y'all, here is the link. I dropped it in the chat, that link to the quiz, which is so much fun. So anyway, that was cool. I was like, I'm so glad as a group we got Rebecca. That's so much fun. But yeah, it's called Which Gothic Novel Are You? So feel free to send that to friends or take it on your own if you like. But anyway, thank you so much, Maggie, for sharing your journey toward discovering your love for Gothic literature. I think we all have a better understanding of what it might mean, and maybe people like me who were going to write it off as just scary stuff that I'm not into, I realized actually I appreciate a lot of Gothic literature, and we still see it in different interpretations of it today, which is awesome. So anyway, thank y'all so much for coming. Next week is going to be really cool. We're going to be talking to, I'm not going to give it away, we're going to be talking to an author. And it's going to be about something that is totally different than anything we've talked about before. So it's going to be really fun, but it's probably going to be unexpected. So anyway, don't miss it. And I look forward to seeing you all next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.